formality has changed and the formality in leadership has changed. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, would I have gone to my leader and said, "Hey, I'm having a mental health crisis?" No, would not, right? I would have been scared to death to do that. So I think the positive changes are that there is so much more attention around what makes us healthy and how to remain healthy and how we can do that from a cultural perspective where it's not taking away from productivity, it's not taking away from our goals and what we're trying to accomplish. In fact, it's feeding them. Because when you feel cared about, you are much more likely to work harder, right?
At Elements of Culture, we sit down with experts in leadership and team building to explore the DNA that drives a thriving organization. Hello and welcome everyone to Elements of Culture. My name is Taryn and I'm joined with my co-host Julie today. And we are talking with Brittanie Knezovich. She is the Chief Revenue Officer at ShipSigma. And we're so thrilled, Brittany, that you're here with us today to talk about all things work culture, people, leadership, all those different things. But before we do, just want to say thank you for joining the show. And if you don't mind, just give us a little bit about your background and kind of what's led you to where you're at today at ShipSigma.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Such a passionate topic for me, the people and the culture behind an organization. So thank you for having me. I actually have been in the world of logistics for 25 years. I started with FedEx in 2005 as a field sales rep and just kind of worked my way up trying to solve problems, really, whether that was internally or externally. Found my way into leadership in 2019 and then continued my leadership journey through different portions of that business and then over into Narvar, where I took a VP of sales role prior to coming to ShipSigma. So such a fun journey I've been on and something I'm just really passionate about.
That's so good. You know, you mentioned one thing about being a problem solver. I think you can't be in leadership or sales without being a professional problem solver. you know,
So true. It's so true.
and it's just funny. We talk about sales or talk about leadership, but I also think sometimes what ends up happening is you just kind of naturally fall into some of these roles based on your own, kind of personal skill sets or just enjoying solving problems. So tell me a little bit about ShipSigma before we get into some of the leadership and people discussion. What is ShipSigma? What do you do there? And how do you serve your clients?
Sigma is an amazing organization. So we use our proprietary software to help customers around the US really just save money and better optimize their overall logistics revenue and the space within logistics. It can be so complex. People think it's easy. It's pretty complex. And so really just using the software and using the team we have to help these customers better understand what's happening within their supply chain and then make it a little more efficient.
So, Brittany, talk to me a little bit about you were talking about the client experience, and we before the podcast we were talking about your passion for people. Talk to me a little bit about your journey in leading people and leadership, and how that's changed over the course. And in logistics in itself, like I know the sales side of it is because I have friends that it's pretty aggressive. And so like talk to me a little bit about how you keep a team motivated. How do you keep them healthy? I would love to know that because I could probably give some advice right now to some people.
Yeah. Well, I'll take advice too. So this is not just about giving. I mean, I think, I took over my very first sales team was at FedEx and I took over this team of 10 people and they were in a pretty bad place, honestly. Their beloved leader, who's a fantastic person, had been let go and his wife had a terminal illness and it was just this really devastating time for this team and I took this team and one of 10 was hitting plan. Right. And I kind of was looking at this going, man, how do I not just get them to trust in themselves, but get them to trust each other and trust FedEx again? Because in that moment, there were just so many things that I think that they had lost and the impact on morale was big. And so I took that over in December of 2019 and I thought, okay, we're going to spend all this time together and we're really going to start rebuilding relationships. And it's going to be this really cool experience, lots of in-person, face-to-face. From March and COVID hit. And I thought, well, I guess it's time to get creative, right? So we started with like a fight the quarantine 15 where I was like, let's do a 5K. Like, I don't care if you walk or run or roll down a hill or have your kids pull you in a wagon. I don't care. Just get outside and get moving, right? And let's take some pictures and let's start building some type of culture and camaraderie around how we're all feeling right now, especially in supply chain during COVID, because it was a very, very rough time. Right. And so I started there and I really then started leaning in more of that because what I needed, I was one of 10 and these conversations were incredibly difficult with customers where we had gone from kind of, everybody was single sourced with one of the two large carriers to we didn't pick up their volume. And so it was, the supply chain was overloaded and customers were very, very frustrated. Their business was bigger than it had ever been and so I did a team chopped competition because I needed them to rely on each other, because I couldn't be on every call, right? But I didn't want them to walk in alone. I think a lot of what we do in this world is like, oh, jump in and you can solve every problem by yourself. And the truth is you can't. Diversity of thought is incredibly important. And so I sent them all the same 5 ingredients and made everybody set up their Zoom cameras in their kitchen and gave them 30 minutes, right? With the same instructions and the same ingredients. And we did the thing. Some of their creations were epic. Mine was horrific, but theirs were epic. And I kind of like let everybody look around and we had taste testers in everybody's house, kind of sharing like based on 5 qualifications of whether we liked it or not. But at the end of the day, I was like, okay, you all had the same ingredients and you all had the same instructions. And every single person came up with something so incredibly different. Right. So what I needed them to see was the diversity of thought in that. And so, if you have a customer that's very, very difficult and you need someone to kind of hold their ground, you might want to bring in Kurt because he's very good at that. Or if you need somebody that can just smooth things over and just can kind of keep the mood a little more mellow, bring in Christine. She's amazing at that, right? And it was sort of this ability to see things so differently because when you're looking at food creations, it's much more clear than when you look at it just from a who am I going to call and what am I going to do? And so in doing that, it completely changed the dynamic of the team. I mean, we went from 1 of 10 to hitting plan to 9 of 10 hitting plan. And so there's obviously a revenue component there too, but it's much more about how are we making sure we're taking care of each other? Because if we're doing all the right things, the revenue comes. Right. But it's when we stop doing the right things that I think we start seeing the revenue slow.
So you talked about diversity of thought. I want to get into this because I would love to hear your thought process on how you feel that adds value because I think I would say I have not a lot of leaders but a handful of leaders that would be a little skeptical about diversity of thought and be a little afraid of it.
Geez, I think it's such an important part of any culture, right? So if we're not taking everybody into account and we're not thinking through things differently, we're going to continue to do the things the way we've done them, right? And there's that old saying of what got us here isn't going to be what gets us there. Without adding that diversity of thought, we are truly just limiting ourselves in any growth, whether that's from a company perspective, whether that's from a personal perspective, right? And that whole like I don't want to be the smartest person in the room. First of all, I don't think I've ever been the smartest person in the room, but I also just think like we judge intelligence in so many different ways. And the truth is, Einstein says you can't judge a fish on his ability to climb a tree or he'll fail every time. We have to start looking at it like just because they're not perfect at X, they may be really, really thoughtful and helpful at thinking through why.
Yeah, that's so good. I think that, even from your example, the cooking challenge, which I love that idea. First of all, I think more leaders need to be creative with the way that
Yeah.
they engage their teams. And because what you did there is you took an exercise and you made it really fun. You made it an experience that they probably will continue talking about the rest of their career about this crazy thing Brittany made them do, right? Um,
Always.
but
Yeah.
but my point is that you created a space for them to shine in their own individual ways. And I think that that's so important. I love that you value people and their diversity that they bring to the team because what we're seeing the more conversations, Brittany, that we have with leaders like yourself is that there's continually being just a shift in culture, and that has to do with people. You can't not have a shift in corporate or in your workspace without it impacting the people. I want to talk a little bit about, you gave a very specific exercise, which was really fun. and you
Yeah.
went from one hitting plan to 9 out of 10, which that shows the success of the collaboration. When you think about scaling your team, when you think about scaling, and obviously there's revenue, you are, the chief revenue officer, you're responsible for revenue and your team is.
Yeah.
And so, but you're very focused on people. How do you effectively set some things in place to help scale when you're thinking about, goals and budget for 2026? What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we think all the time that oh, somebody's not hitting a goal or they're not hitting a plan, and many times the majority of people don't want to fail, right? Especially salespeople. Salespeople are very very competitive in their mindset. So a lot of times it's, do they understand the expectation first of all, right? Do they understand what is needed to get to that, to whatever that goal is, whether it's a revenue goal or an activity goal or anything else? Do they, one, understand what that is, right? And is it this many calls a day, or is it this many emails, or what does that outreach look like? And then are they able to track that on their own without me having to call them every morning going, what the hell's going on with this account? Why are you doing this? Why, right? Do they have the ability to track it? And so when we have our one-on-one every week, or we're looking at the same metrics, and look, I'm a huge fan of Stack Reiki because I don't think any salesperson likes to be kind of at the bottom. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a really important area for growth and looking at it, because any person that's ever been in this industry will tell you, like, if they see their name on the bottom, next week it will not be. Right. They will do something to change that. And so it's really just like stating the right expectations, having those expectations super, super clear, and then holding them accountable. It's very simple, but I think when we don't hold people accountable to the expectations we set, it sort of feels like a moving target. Like, what is actually important to my leadership team? And am I achieving that? Am I doing a good job? That's a terrible feeling. Right. I need to know that, like, here are the things I need to do a great job. And if I'm doing those, the numbers will follow.
Yeah, I really like that because I think clear expectations and the communication thereof of
Mm,
that is
yeah.
interesting because I think before in sales, the people who got it, and the people who did was left behind.
Yeah.
And what you would see, to be completely honest, is the same people having the same conversation week on week because what they needed was not, and I think the expectation wasn't clear. And so what happens is you saw them failing week after week, and the people that were succeeding week after week. And it was like this gap that was happening. And I think it was a communication. So I love that
Yeah.
you're saying that. I would love for you to talk to me a little bit about how you have seen in this field how you train and how you coach your salespeople to be not as, or maybe it is, I don't know. Maybe has the clientele changed? Are we still as transactional as we used to be, or what does that look like in the logistics world? And how do we coach how do you coach your teams to
Yeah.
understand the customer better?
I would think if anybody's transactional in sales, they're probably failing, right? You can't be. You really have to be a problem solver. I think if you go in as a salesperson, look, I've been in sales 25 years. I can tell you, I don't like salespeople. When you ask me to go buy a car, I'm like, please no, please don't make me do this, right? Because it's just not my thing. So yeah. So I think the most important part is you can't be a salesperson, right? You have to be a problem solver. You have to go in thinking about, like, and genuinely want to help as opposed to genuinely want to sell. And so, but I think when we look at coaching and how I do coach, I would say, look, there's 20 leadership books over here of all the different types of leadership and all the cool things about it and all the different styles. But I really think if you boil it down, there are two types, right? There are the feed the tigers, where you can nourish and you grow and you help build and you help strengthen and you allow failure, but you allow to fail fast and then to learn from it and move on. And then there's kind of like whip the horses, right? You're going to get there and you're going to get there fast and you have to, and it's this very kind of pace setting leadership style. And look, there's a place for both. There's a time and a place that I think both are successful. I would say I am very very much a feed the tigers leader. I'm not somebody that expects somebody to sort of sprint a marathon. I think that causes ridiculous amounts of burnout, and just taking away a salesperson's confidence in themselves or in their process is the quickest way to kill their numbers. right? And so really trying to feed them and understand what does motivate them and how they understand and how they accept some really hard conversations. It doesn't have to be criticism, right? But we have to have hard conversations, and I think there's a way to do that like with kindness and empathy, and there's a way to do that with a little more grit. And so I think I really try and focus on how can we get the right messaging across and get it heard in a way that's not going to feel that I'm criticizing or attacking, because I'm not. At the end of the day, I wouldn't invest the time in somebody if I didn't see the value in them, right?
Yeah, that's so good. I think, you have to, as you're training, it's like you're constantly investing in their development. One of the things that I've experienced myself, Brittany, in leading a team and talking with so many leaders is that you're oftentimes like, not only are you a sales coach, you're a life coach, you're a therapist, you're like all these things. You're all these things.
Yeah.
You're a chef who's coaching them along, virtually on
Yes.
a cooking project. I want
Yeah.
to, kind of translate into that space of wellness, with
Yeah.
salespeople and targets and quotas. Life can be challenging. We all have so much going on. We're in a world that's so connected through technology, even through this podcast. As sales teams, you've got tools, you've got systems in place. There's such a level of connectedness, but at the same time, we're also going through this crisis of mental health that is just a big thing. So I want to talk to you a little bit, Brittany, just about how do you, as a leader, how do you show up for your team? What are the expectations that your team has if somebody does have a crisis, a family situation? How do you navigate those things? Because I think for a sales leader, we're constantly talking about scaling, but people are still people. People still go through people things like mental health or a crisis
Yeah.
at home. How do you manage through some of those hardships?
Yeah, I think initially it starts with vulnerability on my end, right? So when I'm meeting my new team, when I'm talking through things with them, I am incredibly vulnerable about who I am and what my background is, that I am a mommy first, right? That I'm a triathlete, that physical fitness is very important to me, and you'll always find me running, or you'll find this or that. I'm very, very honest with them, and talk about my kids, and want them to talk about theirs. I don't think it's ever a bad thing that, when we have cameos of people's kids popping in to say hello. I'm a huge fan of that, because their work self is such a small part of their overall self. And so the ability to better understand me, I think, opens the door for me to better understand them. And then really talking through kind of what's important to them. If I know that maybe one of their kids isn't doing well, or their spouse isn't doing well, really better understanding that, because at the end of the day, it is all tied together and we're human. I really don't, AI is an amazing thing, but I don't want to use that to run an organization. I want the team to understand how cared about they are, and that as a company, we're doing everything we can to continue to care for them.
So, Brittany, you said you've been in the field 25 years.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little about what has changed culturally in 25 years,
Jeez.
and what has changed for the better, and has anything changed for the worse, or is there something that we need to be aware of as cultural dynamics have changed as generations have entered the workforce? I'd love to, because 25 years is a long time for you to see a lot, and so I'm very curious to see what has changed. And are you the type of leader that you had 25 years ago, or are you a completely different type of leader?
Yeah, I think formality has changed dramatically, right? I used to show up to work in a suit every single day. That was what we did. And the other day I looked in my closet, I was like, I still have like 10 suits, and I'm not sure why. Nobody wears them anymore. But the formality has changed, and the formality in leadership has changed. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, would I have gone to my leader and said, "Hey, I'm having a mental health crisis"? No, would not, right? I would have been scared to death to do that. So I think the positive changes are that there is so much more attention around what makes us healthy and how to remain healthy, and how we can do that from a cultural perspective, where it's not taking away from productivity, it's not taking away from our goals and what we're trying to accomplish. In fact, it's feeding them, because when you feel cared about, you are much more likely to work harder, right? And so I think overall it has changed very dramatically in our willingness just to be more open and human with each other. um, I think there's always, I would love to say that nothing's changed for the worse. I think a lot has, right? I think companies have definitely gotten more revenue focused. They've gotten more kind of top line focused over people focused, I think they kind of forget what got them to where they are. And so I think it's incredibly important to change that dynamic back. And the only way to do that is through modeling that behavior.
Yeah, that's so good. I think you talk about the suits and just the way that, people showed up. I think I just have this picture of the 90s, like everyone's in a suit and heels. And I
Yes,
can't remember the
always.
last time I wanted to show up to, a meeting or a corporate event, like that. And I do think there's a level of professionalism that we've gotten away with, especially with virtual meetings and things. And so, but there's, it's culture has changed. I do think, if you were having like needed a mental health day, you would never have gone to your boss. I don't
No.
know that I would have gone to my boss and said that 10 years ago. But now I think there's been so many different world events and things that we've all experienced that we do have to make room for that. The other thing that I think has made a big impact on that is that, when it comes to talent and recruiting and talent acquisition, it's very competitive, so people are actually looking for companies that they're aligned with, that they can share their own personal values with. And so they don't want to, they're no longer willing to work for a company that doesn't have a space for them to be healthy as an individual. And so you see them leaving. And there's been almost, and Julie and I have talked about this, there's been this like mass exodus from some corporate companies because people are no longer willing to stay. I don't know if you've seen that over your career.
Thank God, right? Like,
All right.
let's all be
Thank God they left. Thank God we left.
thank God they did the right thing for themselves and their mental health. Nobody deserves to be unhappy, right?
Right.
So yes, I've seen it. I think we will continue to see it. I think, it's funny. I have a 26-year-old son and he is, finishing college and he's sort of like it's interesting to look at like the types of roles he's interested in right now because he is very, very thoughtful about like Glassdoor reviews and is this somewhere I would want to work? And if those reviews are poor, it's almost like an immediate no for him. And I think it technology has done so many great things and it has taught us that we can listen to what others have experienced within an organization. And by doing that, we take that very seriously. I take that very seriously as I'm looking at kind of growing into different roles.
So, Brittany, I would love to know what are your thoughts on what does logistics looks like in 5 years? And what's
Jeez.
going to change? Like, do you have, like, when you're looking at AI, you're looking at all the platforms that are out there, it's moving so quickly, where I just think, like, what I know now, like, by the time I get to it in 3 months, something's changed and there's new technology. I'm like, I can't keep up. So, talk to me a little about what this is going to look like because because I think for the world that doesn't know logistics, they think, oh, it's the same, but so much has changed. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so much has changed. So what do you think few years looks like in logistics? And what are you expecting on the forefront of that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would love to say I have a crystal ball, and I can tell you if I did, I would be rich and I'd never probably have to work again. I think it will continue to change. I mean, I think technology look, when I would sell a customer in 2005, it would take them 3 to 6 months to transition from one carrier to another because of moving technology and doing all the things today. That's the flip of a switch. They can do that per shipment, they can switch carriers, right? And so I think we'll continue to see technology have a big play in that. But I also think regional carriers are becoming more and more prevalent than they've ever been, and for good reason, right? It's actually a lot more sustainable. It seems right when you look at these hub and spokes networks of the two big carriers. Everything is going to a centralized hub and then going back out. And so, if I'm in California and I'm shipping to Colorado, it may go from California to Memphis to Colorado, which doesn't feel as sustainable as some of these local carriers can do. So I think we'll continue to see a rise in that. Obviously, the gig transportation network has changed things pretty dramatically, so I think that will continue to have an impact. And then just the overall way that we manage supply chains, the overall way that we look at them and think through the best way to get something from somewhere. Over the last 5 years or so, surcharges within the supply chain world have doubled and tripled, and there's been all sorts of different ones that have come up. And I remember telling customers during COVID, I did this. I'm so sorry, all those customers I told this to. I was like, look, I've been here 20 years. This isn't going to continue. It's not going to continue to happen. This is a very weird time in the world. This is COVID. This is that. guess what? It didn't just continue. It started compounding like more and more and more. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't have been more wrong, right? About my experience having, foreshadowed anything. I was wrong. The bottom line is we're going to keep seeing that because they can. And so how do we then look at that and get smarter from a supply chain perspective and from a customer perspective of how do we ship this and how do we do that a little differently?
Yeah, I think that's so good. Things continue to evolve. When you think you know something, you actually don't. There's more there's more room to learn, right?
I have never felt more dumb in my whole life than every year I get older, right? Like I'm like, "Oh my gosh." My 16-year-old knows everything though. So
Yeah.
she is very smart.
I'm sure she really is, but I'm sure she really
Yes.
feels like she's very
Oh,
smart.
everything. Yeah.
It's so funny. It's so funny. You said this on earlier on the call. You're a mom first, and it's funny. You bring those experiences, into your work too, and it's just interesting that you say that because I think that there's even leaders though. I think it's also it's a mindset too. There's leaders who are well established in their career, and they also don't want to come away from change. Like they don't want to shift into doing something new, even though everything in their environment is pointing to it's not working.
Yeah.
There has to be a change, but yet there's like this mindset where they don't want to move away from it. What would you say for companies that are scaling? We've obviously talked about, people as part of the scaling. In a world that we don't know everything, things are continuing to shift and change. What do leaders really need to have as top of mind in scaling their teams and setting their companies and their teams up for success? I mean, what are some key things that you think leaders need to be aware of?
I mean, documented goals, right? We have to know what we are searching for. So, what is our end game, beginning with the end in mind and knowing, hey, if my goal is X, here is how I get there and really backing into that, right? So, if we're not documenting that and that is not clear and super understandable to everybody involved, right? If I say it, then every person on my team should be saying the exact same thing because it is so easy to understand and it is so clear and we're all heading in the same direction. So I think without goals and without clearly documented stated goals, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? And then just accountability to those goals, right? Again, if they're not able to track exactly how they're getting there, or if I'm not able to understand that without having to call them, there's no way that's sustainable. The scalable way to do that is communicate the goal really clearly, have it an easy, simple way to be accountable to that goal for the team as well as for yourself, and then monitor that progress on a weekly basis, right? It's every single week. What are we doing to get closer to that goal? It's not just we're going to state it and then every quarter we'll do a check-in. We get way too far behind if we do that. It's a weekly check-in of, hey, what did we do this week that got us closer? Even if it's a simple one thing, right, that got us closer to that goal, how are we monitoring that? And are we where we need to be along the progress line of what our timeline is to achieve the goal?
That's so good. It's almost like, you as leaders and company leaders, CEOs, you have to hold yourself accountable, right, to meet those goals. Because what I've seen happen in poor leadership is there's been things communicated, but then there's not a check and balance along the way. And it's like, what was the point of the strategy meeting, of the 3 months of strategy planning, when there's not that communication along the way? You're laughing because you know what I'm talking about.
So true. I remember at one point a sales team member of mine said, "Oh, it's okay. I'm not going to be upset by this because it'll change again next week." We had this leader that was very like, well, "This week this is what's important, and next week something else is going to be important," and it was just impossible to keep up with, right? And so, like, you have to having targets that move is the most frustrating part of being an individual contributor, of being a leader, right? We need to have targets. They need to be very, very stable, and we all have to be marching toward that same goal.
Yeah, I agree. I've definitely been a part of conversations like that. It's like, oh, don't worry about it. It's the hot topic of the week. It's like how successful are we really being right now?
Well, I
Yes.
think the moving target creates inconsistency and lack of trust. So what
Absolutely.
happens is, yeah, like we can't when moving target comes every week, in our team meetings, it's kind of like, you give the eye roll and you're like, okay, I can't take you seriously now and it compromises the core value of what we're trying to do, I think. It communicates inconsistency. We don't know what we're doing, and then lack of trust from the leadership part. And so I've been on both ends of that, I think,
Yes.
because like I think, like in my younger years, I would say, as a leader, like giving moving targets. Because in my panic of not understanding that, hey, like, I need to do something, right? Like that we need to
Yeah.
a value that maybe they can catch on to, but it's really like the consistency factor, I think, creates stability for sales leaders, and it communicates the same thing over and over again to create that rhythm. So I've been on both ends of that, where I've been rolling my eyes in the meeting, and then also providing a moving target, like because I just didn't know. You're just wanting some type of result, right, from it. And
Yeah.
so,
I think is panic does very, very interesting things to leadership style. I have seen myself exactly as you stated, like really all of a sudden not being me anymore because I was panicked about the pressure I was getting from other individuals, right? And it's an interesting thing to see when all of a sudden it stops you in your tracks and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know who I am anymore because I feel so panicked about whatever is happening." And so it's this fine line of making sure the team knows where you're marching toward, but also not being a conduit of that panic to the team. And it's incredibly difficult to keep those 2 things separated.
That's so good. I want to, before we wrap up, Brittany, I've loved this conversation just about leadership, transparency, clarity that you can bring to the team. I think that more and more workplaces need to put just a focus on that because at the end of the day, it's the people that get you to where you need to go to move the needle. And so, what can you as an organization do to show up for your team and for your people? At the end of the day, each of us is an individual as well. You have your own personal needs. Brittany, you mentioned you're a mom first. You have a 24-year-old who's on the job hunt and a 16-year-old who knows everything that she needs to know about life, as most 16-year-olds do. But you also mentioned, I want to touch on this. You also mentioned you're a triathlete, which that takes a lot of discipline, a lot of dedication. So as a leader, as a chief revenue officer, who, you're in this space where there is constant change, but you're also a busy mom, but also someone who's very disciplined. How do you manage to balance like all the different areas of life's demands on you so that you can continue to show up for yourself?
Yeah, I think it's priorities, right? I talked to somebody one day and they said like, "Oh, how do you get up every morning and work out?" And it's very much the same as like deciding you're getting up every morning and taking a shower or brushing your teeth, right? You would never go into a meeting without doing that. And it really just has to be a mind shift of like, "Look, this is a very important thing for me, and so I'm going to prioritize that." As we all know as moms, kids make themselves a priority, right? There is it is very difficult not to prioritize your kids because they're very good at whether
They
it's sports. Yeah, so they take care of that one for me. And then I think, work it's fun to prioritize because I work for my team and I have an amazing team of people who are just putting so much time and effort in to continue to grow with me. So for me, the priority is fun on that front because I get to show up for them in any way that I can.
That's so good. Yeah. It's a mindset. You just make a decision to show up and you prioritize the things that are important to you, whether it be, physical movement, which I think that we all need more of that because,
Yeah.
we've been sitting down this whole podcast, like
Yes.
we all spend our lives doing so much sitting and not enough movement. But I also think that we can reap just great health benefits from it. Well, Brittany, thank you so much for joining us for the
No,
elements of just your conversation, your passion and leadership for people. It really shines through. And we just thank you to contributing to the conversation.
thank you both so much. Such a pleasure. Have a great day.